Hey kid, this is Ivan. How you doing? Today I want to talk a little bit about my experience with monsters in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. It's been long enough now that I've been running the game for the kids at the library. I've been playing in a game of 5e, ran by Eloy and with Jose and Eloy's daughter. And so I've had experience like with the characters, with using various monsters, facing various monsters, and you want to give my basic impression now that I played the game and ran the game, you know, uh, about the monsters in 5e. What's the feel like compared to other games, compared to the older games I used to play? And this is not a video about how one way is better than the other. It's just what's the feel like, and I'll talk a little bit more about like design intention at the end of the video, or at least what I see is the design intention and how well they hit the mark and all that sort of thing. Anyhow, it's really hard to talk about the monsters in 5e without starting to digress about the characters and their level of prowess and all that sort of thing. But I'll try to keep that to the end because otherwise I'll just go way off on a tangent. Because I did another draft of this video which completely went sideways, and I didn't want to have to keep saying this video is not about that. So overall, like when I first read the book, the first thing I'm thinking to myself is, my goodness, these monsters have a lot of hit points. And, in some cases, wow, they do an awful lot of damage. And I'm looking at the challenge levels and I'm trying to, wrap my head around that and what it might mean, and reading the, description in the books of like what kind of challenge to use with what various types of party, all that sort of thing. And I started to put together, monsters in the place they would normally be, but tried to be careful about it. And in running the game with the kids, we've done their campaign. Where right now they're up to like 5th level. There's a couple of the kids that came in later that are 3rd level. They're just about to hit 4th. And in the game with Eloy, we've gone from 1st level. Now we're up to 4th level. So pretty cool. But I've also run some one shots with the kids where I've taken the characters that were 3rd level and bumped them up to 5th level, and they when not everybody was there, I said, oh, let's fight a troll, let's fight a dragon, let's fight whatever it happens to be, and so I've got a chance to use some other creatures against them, and they had some fun with that. But what's the feel actually really been like? And overall, I've noticed that the monsters tend to be pushovers. They tend to be a lot weaker in actual practice than they look on paper, and they tend to be much less of a threat than they used to be in older editions, despite the fact that the hit points are different, all that sort of thing, because the math is different on all sides. So you really have to take a look at it, the entire picture, before you can, and you have to play it too, before you can actually come up with a fair comparison, a fair idea. So overall, the monsters can seem very, I've had them fight like an Audiog. I've had them, they've gone up against trolls a couple times. They fought a dragon, which, killed them. But this was in the one-shot sort of thing. I fought a bunch of other monsters, sea hags, night hags. We had a one-shot, with Beholder. They had a bit of an army, but so did the Beholder, with ghouls and all that sort of stuff. I think the night hag was actually involved in that one as well. Had a bunch of, different, fought some, oh gosh, some spectators, and a bunch of creatures that are fairly powerful, on paper. And I've noticed, there's definitely a truism that like facing a big monster by themselves, the bigger monsters tend to go right over, with the exception of the super powerful things like the dragon and what have you, which does an awful lot of hit points all at once. I was surprised at how ineffective the Beholder was, because the saves versus Beholder, aren't terribly easy, but they were making their saves. They just had a lucky day with dice. But overall, they probably got really lucky with the Beholder. Overall, the monsters that seem to be level appropriate, they managed to push over fairly easily. The most trouble they've gotten into is facing some lower level, monsters, but a lot of them. More attacks. The math works out that way. And they seem to get in a little bit more danger that way. But overall, the game seems to do what it's been designed to do, and that is to foster the illusion of risk, the illusion of danger. You don't need to necessarily fudge die rolls to save the characters, because they're probably not going to get killed anyway, and they're probably going to kill this horrific, scary monster fairly easily, or within a few rounds. And that's what I've noticed is that three, maybe 4 rounds in, they've dispatched whatever it is that they're after. It's very rare that things have gone on for several rounds. A few times, but not too often. Um, and so, I've had to sort of make my peace with this, that, things are not quite as difficult or scary as I imagined they might be. A few times the kids are genuinely scared and concerned and nervous, which is fine because that's what you're after. When I'm running it for the kids at the library, it is definitely about entertainment. I have definitely pulled strings one way or the other to manipulate the experience because that's what they're there for. It's not what I would normally do. But it's interesting. You don't necessarily, the game manipulates that part of the experience for you. If anything, if it's your intention to make things harder, to foster more of an illusion of risk, you may, in running this game, have to artificially, in the moment, inflate the stats of the monsters to make them last longer. And why would you do that? Well, my friends and I were having a discussion a while ago, and I don't want to, talk too much about that because this video isn't about that. But there's various times you might do something like that, and why would you do it? Is it because you think that the encounter isn't epic enough? Is it because your players are going to get disappointed if it's not epic enough? Are you misjudging it, or did you just simply not have anything else planned? And man, when this fight's over, I don't know what else to do for the rest of the session. All that kind of stuff. There's a great book you ought to read. It's called The Elusive Shift. It's by a guy named Jon Peterson. I think it's Jon. And in it, you see that, these discussions that we have, the larger gaming community has about role-playing games, about all various facets of role-playing games and the experience, these are not new discussions. These are discussions that were being had in 1974 and way before that in the wargaming community. There's no topics that we talk about that they haven't already talked about for decades, and we're still in the same place. Go read that book. Go get that book. This video's not about that, but it's a darn good book. So, back to what I was talking about. The game seems to be designed to foster that, illusion of risk, but there's not really going to be any risk. The characters are going to stay alive. On the flip side of this, I said I'd talk about the characters a little bit. In the beginning, the common knowledge that the characters are a little squishy at first and second level seems to be true. It was a little bit tougher. But at this point, we're dealing with people that are between third and fifth level. They've all got pretty good armor. The people with the worst armor class are the wizards, my character, and the girl playing the wizard in the library party. So we have to do some tactics like, say, protect the wizard, keep them in back, shoot spells over the heads of everybody else, all that kind of stuff. It's a learning experience for them, for sure. Other than that, everybody else has fairly decent armor class. The monsters, the armor class range is squished. The monsters have a lot of hit points, but very often their armor class is kind of in that middle range. The players, by this point, they have some significant attack bonuses to their hit rolls, so that statistically they hit those monsters all the time. And also, by this point, they're dealing a lot of damage. The math is different than it was in, say, BX or AD&D. So they're doing a ton of damage. So even though some monsters have 120, 130 hit points, okay, well, about 5 or 6 hits, they're going to kill them. At that point, and you're going to hit just about every single time when there's more than one, person attacking them. Like I said, they've gotten into more trouble with multiples, of weaker monsters, and so overall, that's the experience. It's not as frightening as some other games. It's certainly not as frightening as when we're playing Ubiquity. We're not as frightening as playing older versions like BX or Lamentations of the Flame Princess or Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers of Hyperborea. And yes, I back the Hyperborea 3E Kickstarter and all that kind of stuff. It's a different feel. You know going in there that the player characters are going to emerge victorious. It's very, very unlikely, based on a lot of the mechanics in the game, that they're going to be killed. And this is, something that, the kids and I had as a session 0. They didn't want their characters to die. This works out great. I have to do very little manipulation behind the screen, but should that happen, I've had them get captured and all that other kind of stuff. So yeah, so that's what the experience has been with the monsters in various ways. They're, a little disappointing. You start to realize that the game also does what it seems to be designed to do, which is to keep the player characters alive and to, do the heavy lifting of keeping them alive for you, so you're not fudging dice rolls or manipulating things behind the screen.